Hello, in today's video I'm going to show you how to make this blouse out of an old men's shirt. I bought 4 shirts from the local charity shop. They cost between £1 and £1.75 each. So I made some little sleeves, some little puff sleeves, and this frill around the neck, and I lowered the neck and I shortened it, and with the bits I cut off the bottom, that's how I made this frill around the neck. So let's get started and I'll show you how I made it. I try on the shirt and I put pins in all the places where I think it needs taking in, and I put marks where my shoulders are and where I'd like the neckline to be. So I put a few pins, and also the length of it, because obviously it's a bit too long for me, so I need to shorten it. So I put all these marks, so when I come to cut it out and remove the parts I don't want, I know exactly where, I know roughly where to cut. And the first thing that I do is to remove the collar, because I know I definitely don't want this collar. It's way too big for me. So I just cut the collar off. Then I use a blouse that I know fits me well to work out where the sleeve openings will be, because obviously they're going to be further in than they are on this shirt. So I just match it up with my shirt or blouse that I know fits, and I'm going to put marks every now and then I'll join the marks up with my curved ruler. I make the marks on the front first because the back will be slightly different. So make sure you get your front marks put in first. Use your curve to draw in the line if you have a curve. If not, you're going to have to do it freehand and join these dots up freehand. But if you do have a curve, use the curve. Then using my curved ruler, I put marks for my seam allowance. So I'm going to cut on this second lot of marks and not on the first one, because we need to allow for a seam allowance when we're doing this. So I've cut the front, and next I cut about 2 inches off the side seam, which should bring me up to the bottom of the armhole. Then I place my blouse back on top of the shirt to work out where I'm going to cut the back of the armhole opening. But when I feel through, it seems like it's in exactly the same place as the front. So I do decide to actually wing it and just work it out for myself. Then I use my washable fabric pen to put a few marks where I think the back armhole opening should be. Then I join my dots up freehand with my fabric pen before cutting. And of course, repeat this process with the other sleeve. But when I did the second side, I folded the shirt over to use the first side as a template, so I got the 2 sides matching. Next, I cut off the bottom of the shirt because it's way too long for me. So from the mark I made when I was looking at myself in front of the mirror, I just cut off, and in this case it's quite easy because I've got the checks to follow, so I'm following the checks and cutting off the bottom of the shirt. And keep this fabric, you must keep it, because you're going to need it later for the frills and the neckband. I removed the old shoulder and side seams from the sleeve, but kept the bottom hem. You'll see why later. And made sure I marked which was the back of the sleeve and which was the front. So I've put a pin on the front and a clip on the back of the sleeves. And I'm going to gather over the shoulders on both of these sleeves. I'm basically going to gather between the 2 marks I've put for the front and the back of the sleeve. So I'm going to do a line of loose stitching on number 4 on the length of my sewing machine, so that I can gather up the sleeves to make them a little bit more feminine. At my sewing machine, I actually do 2 rows of stitching on number 4, so they're nice loose stitching, and I will be then able to gather them up, pull them tight, so I get a little bit of a puff sleeve at the top of my shoulders. So I do exactly the same to both of the sleeves. I do 2 rows of stitching. You can do 3 rows of stitching if you want, but I think that 2 is enough for this. Do the first row of stitching 1/4 of an inch away from the edge, and the second row 1/2 inch away from the edge, and remember not to back tack at the start or the finish. Now to gather up the sleeves, so pull both of the threads, so you've got 2 rows of threads, pull on both of them, and you're best to use the bobbin one, that is the bottom thread that comes from the bottom. Pull these 2 threads and gradually gather up your sleeve until you've got it to the right length, and then you can spread out the gathers to suit, and do exactly the same for both of your sleeves. Remember, we're not gathering all the way, it's just the top part of the sleeve, and I've done it between where I put my clip and my pin. Next, attach the sleeve to the shirt, so with right sides facing, pin or clip one of the ends together, then pin the other end together, and then pin the middle. Then pin the rest of the way around, making sure that your gathers are nice and even. So if you need to make it a little bit tighter, pull your gathers up to make it a little bit tighter. And here I'm just rounding off that top a little bit better because it was a little bit pointed, and then I carry on pinning, or rather clipping in place and smoothing out those gathers until it all fits nicely. And fit the other sleeve in exactly the same way. Then sew both sleeves in place, taking a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, this time back tacking at the start and the finish and removing any clips as you go along. Next, thread some elastic through the bottom casing of your sleeve. This is already there on my sleeve and I don't have to do anything. All I'm going to do is thread some elastic through the bottom of the sleeve because there's already a nice little casing there. So I first measured how long I wanted the elastic by measuring around my arm. Then I thread the elastic through, so I should have a little bit sticking out at each end, and I pin these in place. Then sew across each end of the elastic just to secure it in place, and do the same for both sleeves. Now we need to pin together the sleeves and the side seams. Make sure that all the gathers are moved away from the top of the sleeve so you can pin it together more easily, and then continue to pin the sleeve together, matching up the front and back side seams, and then pin all the way down the side, or you can clip if you prefer. Just in case anybody notices, I have actually already sewn this seam, but when I filmed the pinning of it, I did it in slow motion, so I've just filmed again. Obviously a little bit late, but anyway, there you go. Then sew the sleeve and side seams, taking a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish and removing any clips or pins as you go, and back tacking at the end, and repeat for both sides of your blouse. Now I did overlock most of my seams, but you could always just zigzag them on your sewing machine if you wanted to. Now I decided that I wanted my neck edge to be a bit lower, so using my curved ruler I draw in a new neckline, and I'm using a friction pen for this so it will iron off later. Then I cut around the lines that I made for my new neck edge. Using the fabric you cut off from the bottom of your shirt, cut a 2-inch wide length of fabric. This is for the frill that goes around the neck. You may need to cut more than one strip, so measure the length of your blouse around the neck opening, and if you want a nice full frill, double that length for your frill, but I used 1.5 times the length of my neck opening. Turn over the edges by turning over 1/4 of an inch and then folding over 1/4 of an inch again, and then press. Then fold one of the sides over in exactly the same way, 1/4 of an inch followed by another 1/4 of an inch, and iron in place. Continue folding and then ironing for the whole length of the strip, and then pin or clip in place. You only turn under the edges on one side and both of the ends. Leave the other side for now. Then sew down the first side, turn around and carry on all the way along the edge that you turned under, about 1/8 of an inch away from the edge, removing any pins or clips as you go along, and remember to back tack when you get to the end. Then to gather up our neck trim frill, we need to sew 2 rows of stitching on a large stitch, so on my machine that's number 4, and we don't back tack at the start or the finish, we just sew 2 seams on number 4 along the raw edges. I like to gather my frill a little bit before attaching it, so to do this you pull 2 of the ends of thread and gather up your frill a little before attaching it. Then attach the centre of the frill and the 2 ends of the frill before pulling tight your gathers and evening them out, and then pin in place. I like to use pins for this, and I pin them at right angles to the seam. Then sew, taking a 5/8 of an inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish, and you want to sew with the gather side facing up, and remove your pins as you go along. You don't really want to sew over them. I missed filming this next part, but I cut a length of fabric 1.5 inches wide and the length of my neck edge plus 1 inch. I then pin this to my neck edge with the right sides of the strip I've just cut facing the right side of the frill, and I pin all the way along, leaving about 1/2 inch overlapping at each end. I then sew, taking a 1/2 inch seam allowance, back tacking at the start and the finish. Then trim that seam to 1/4 inch. So you want to cut all the excess fabric off and just leave 1/4 inch behind. Turn the raw edge of the band you have just attached over by 1/4 inch and press towards the wrong side of the blouse. Continue to press like this all the way along to the end. Then press the seam that you have just sewn up towards the band and turn the ends under so that they are flush with the edge of the blouse, and then fold the band over and clip in place. Then continue to fold the band over, making sure that you cover up your original seam line from when you attached the band. So keep pinning or clipping all the way along, and when you get to the end, turn the end under again as you did at the other end and clip in place. Then sew along the band about 1/8 inch away from the edge, back tacking at the start and the finish and removing any of your clips and pins as you go along. Then turn under the hem. I just turned it under 1/4 inch and another 1/4 inch, and then I clip or pin in place, and then I sewed about 1/8 inch away from the edge, back tacking at the start and the finish. Another thing I did was to exchange the buttons. They did originally have this one, the blue, dark blue one, and I swapped them out for these. They're the originals. That's what I swapped for. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you managed to make one of these blouses or something similar. You don't have to do exactly the same. You can use your own imagination. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, could you please like and subscribe?